The Eisenhower Matrix, created by President Eisenhower, all around time management and decision making, and it's how we look at things that are important versus things that are urgent on a matrix of low to high. And then that helps us understand what we put in each quadrant and therefore where we should spend our time. A leader is somebody who naturally brings people along, creates a vision, motivates people, wants people to feel that they want to be part of what they're doing, versus a manager, which can be a lot more.
What breaks typically when teams tend to grow quickly or merge?
Fundamentally, like the values and the identity of the team can then start wobbling if they haven't been strongly.
Muhami Matters with Chris Adams, powered by CJA Consulting.
Welcome to Muhami Matters, where credibility meets clarity in legal and professional services. I'm your host, Chris Adams, founder of Muhami and CJA Consulting. Today I'm joined by Kate Manton, coach, facilitator and speaker at Baobab Works. Kate works with leaders and teams when things get really heavy, so often after growth spurts or restructures, leadership changes, even M&A. And Kate helps them rebuild how they lead, communicate and challenge each other so that standards go up, not down. So today we're going to talk about what it actually looks like when leadership feels lighter, in inverted commas, how to spot when a team is quietly bleeding money through miscommunication, and how to create psychological safety without going soft, using what Kate calls positive tension and shared conflict. Kate, welcome. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me. I'm really pleased to be here.
So for anyone who hasn't come across your work yet, could you just briefly introduce yourself and Baobab Works, even if I've said it right?
No, that's absolutely fine. Yeah, Baobab Works. So yeah, founder of
Baobab.
Baobab Works. Yeah, Baobab. I specialise in working with teams and leaders on how they can maximise their efforts. Right, so often we see when teams are really busy, when they're under the pump, they can start to not realise it, but they can start wasting energy, time, talent, money, right? And so I work with them in a kind of coaching / facilitating perspective where there's part insight, part reality check, and really checking, how are they working together? How is leadership working with them, right? How can we make leadership feel lighter and the team really maximise all the effort that they're putting in?
So how did you get to that point? I think you've had a long career, I think, before you started making people feel lighter, or leadership feel lighter at least.
So I spent just under 2 decades actually working in the market research industry. Spent time working with Nielsen Research, time working with Ipsos Research and Catalyx as well, managing teams across, at the biggest point, I guess, was about 40 countries, 1,500 people, and then teams as small as 5 people in one country. And it didn't matter really the size of the team or where they were. The way that we lead, the way that we connect with people, the way that we get the most out of people and support them, it's the same, right? Yes, there's different countries, different departments, different cultures, but it fundamentally, the principles are the same. And so I did that for about 2 decades. And now I do some lecturing in HR, leadership, operations management, and I do this. I work with teams and leaders to maximise everything that they're doing.
So what do you mean then by making leadership feel lighter?
So the phrase change is the only constant, right? It's overused, we know that. Change is the only constant. But the reality is, I think that a couple of years ago, you'd feel, oh, there's a change coming. But now it's all around us. And I think leaders and teams can feel bombarded, right? Whether we're talking about digitization, AI, whether we're talking about pressure on the bottom line, whether we're talking about, making the most out of the teams that we've got, it can feel heavy. It can feel like a heavy cloak. And yes, when you're a leader, you're accountable, absolutely. It's a big job. You're getting paid to do a job, to run a team, to deliver. But we want to make sure that we don't lose that enjoyment and fun, but also make sure that we're managing ourselves the right way so that we're doing the right stuff as leaders. It's how do we lift the weight off our shoulders? How do we empower appropriately? How are we a multiplier? And at the end of the day, how do we continue to enjoy it? I talk to a lot of leaders that don't enjoy what they're doing. They're big jobs, but how can we make it feel lighter and again, get the most out of ourselves and our teams?
So at what point then does someone become a leader?
So that's a really interesting question. I think that sometimes you're given a promotion, right? And I've talked to people, I've seen people go, oh my gosh, I've just got a promotion, now I'm a leader. That's not it. You're a leader before you get the name tag, the hat, the role. And I think a leader is somebody who naturally brings people along, creates a vision, motivates people, wants people to feel that they want to be part of what they're doing, versus a manager, which can be a lot more, and super important jobs, right, but are more tactical, kind of more day-to-day. Leaders are visionaries. They make people want to work with them, work for them, and be with them in their atmosphere, in their energy.
So you almost don't really nominate yourself to be a leader, or sometimes I guess people nominate you to be a leader, but what you're saying is you naturally fall into that because of the way you behave or the beliefs you have or the ideas that you have.
I absolutely agree. And that's not to say that we can't learn about leadership. There's not to say that when we're in a position where we are leading people, we don't look to mentors and coaches and people that, we think are good leaders in the public eye in our own personal lives, and, steal with pride the things that we really respect, the things that we go, that's how I want to lead. We continue to learn, and there's definitely a piece of trying to understand how to do things better and differently. But I think people are naturally leaders. I think it is a way of behaving. It's a way of bringing people along with you.
Okay.
And you have the bad leaders and the good leaders, right? As we know, you can have those people that are leaders that we don't necessarily respect what they're doing or how they're doing it, but they will get a job done, And I think today, there's could be a lot of debate in the world today about, leaders in the world that are the ones that we want to aspire to be and the ones that we'd rather not.
Yeah, sometimes when I think of politics, it's sometimes the best of a bad choice. So basically, you just sort of got the least worst choice.
Absolutely. Yeah, and oh gosh, don't get me going down the politics route. And I know that's not what today is about, but you're absolutely right. We do have the best of a bad choice. People that are appointed leaders because there may be nobody else. But I wonder if we're not, really helping grow and develop people that we can see as potential leaders in the future. I don't think we do that early enough.
And do you mean we don't do that early enough in politics, or we don't do that early enough in organisations?
I think in organisations. I think, and it takes time, it takes effort, it takes the right people, who are managing talent and managing succession planning to identify people. But I know for me, one of the biggest things when I was running teams was regular, and I mean regular as in every quarter, reviews with my manager, with my HR business partners as to, right, who is going to take my role when I'm gone? Whether I have been promoted, whether I've left, whether I've won the lottery, who's going to take my role? How are we getting them ready to be a leader of a team? And then when they move up, how are we getting their team ready for somebody to step up? I think a lot of businesses do, but I don't think that we make it a priority all the time because other things take over, right? Most of the time,
the day job, yeah.
Absolutely.
So how early then should this process begin?
I think you could be looking at, if you think of a hierarchy, if you think of an org structure, I think you should always be looking 2 or 3 levels below and thinking and planning for like 12, 24 months out. And again, it takes time. I really recognise it takes time and energy to put aside, right, we're going to do this now. We're going to have, half a day or a couple of hours where we're really looking at succession planning and who we need to develop and who's showing, early signs of being a really strong leader, but they need some guidance and some help along the way. And I was very fortunate. I had that. I was really fortunate. Somebody told me early on, we think potentially you could do this. Is that something you're interested in doing? And now how can we get you to a point where if that opportunity becomes, a reality, you can step in with support and you can drive a team. And I was very fortunate to have leaders who have taken those bets on me throughout my career. But I've seen it where it hasn't happened as well. And at the end of the day, it affects the organisation and the team, right? It's not just individuals. It affects everybody.
Well, yeah, I guess it affects the success of the organisation ultimately.
Absolutely.
As well. The organisation's people are the most important thing.
Absolutely.
So who's responsible for this? I'm going to call it talent spotting. Who's responsible for this talent spotting, realising Kate has some potential she might get promoted at some point, or she's showing some natural leadership abilities, for example. Is it the manager? Is it the CEO? Like who needs to be watching for this and helping the preparations get started?
I've been in meetings where the CEO has been actively engaged in looking at succession planning 6 levels below him. He has been invested in that. And then there have been leadership programs where he has called up somebody, who is 3 or 4, layers beneath him. And he said, hey, we want to invite you to this leadership program because we want to invest in you, because we think you've got, great opportunities ahead of you. We just think you've got it. Again, it takes time, it takes organisation. But in my mind, a CEO should always be thinking about the talent and where we're going to develop those big leaders in an organisation at any level. Obviously, there's it's a waterfall effect, right? And it kind of layers up. But I think that, in a perfect world, a CEO would be involved. It's definitely the manager, and I would always say in collaboration with an HR business partner or talent development leader, because I think you need that balance as well to challenge the manager. Are they thinking about that person in the right way? Are they being really objective, taking a really, really strong step back? And they're not being subjective because that person, is a really strong player in the team. Are they really a leader, or are they really just a very strong individual contributor? And I think you've got to have a really objective view on that.
Yeah, fair enough. I think that's good sage advice for all organisations. So just thinking back on the light versus dark. So when leaders say it feels heavy or it feels dark, what are the signs you're spotting?
So if somebody says, it's getting too much, or it feels, I'm not enjoying it, it is a big red flag, right? And I think a couple of things that I would look for is this idea of pseudo-productivity, right? Somebody is working hard, they're putting all the effort in, but they're not really making the impact that effort should be creating, right? They're focusing on the wrong things. They're focusing on stuff that may be more comfortable to them. They may be dipping down, they may be micromanaging. They're doing instead of really leading. And I think another piece of it as well is, whilst they're doing stuff, they're taking ownership of the wrong stuff, right? People are surrounded by teams who are naturally or have like a native strength in different parts of the business. And we should be tapping into that. And I think sometimes when people feel that kind of heavy weight, whilst they are micromanaging, they're not taking ownership of the right stuff, and they're not doing that multiplier, right? As we need to be multipliers of talent. And the only way we do that is giving responsibility to people and taking that risk, a measured risk on people doing a job in a way that they're going to do it and still get the same impact, rather, the same output, versus the way that we have to do it. And I think I always like to think that leaders bring the weather. And if you have a leader that comes to work and we all have bad days, right? Let's not kid ourselves. But they come to work and it's becoming obvious that, it's becoming too heavy for them. They're not in the right space. Then that weather spreads. There's a ripple effect. And those are some of the things that I would look for if I think that people aren't really leading in the right way. And also you worry about their own personal health, right? And
yes.
How fundamentally we want people to be happy. It needs to be a positive stress that people are, feeling. But those are some of the ways or some of the things that I would look for if someone says, I'm not really feeling it at the moment.
So what does leadership look like on a typical Wednesday? Say we're at a hump day, and what does a light leader look like?
So
is it like constantly smiling or something? Is it just engaged with the team?
Yeah. I love the idea. Being engaged, absolutely. Not constantly smiling, because we are all humans, and we will come and we'll have days where things don't go right. Days where we've got to have those tough conversations. But it's where they're talking and they're focusing on the big stuff, right? They're talking about the vision, they're talking about the strategy, they're talking about the stuff that matters. They've delegated and they've leveraged the team that they have to get the job done. They're stepping in as they need to, but not to be a doer. They're stepping in to help remove obstacles, help remove barriers, help move the team along. But they've got the time and the headspace for the high value stuff, right? Because, leaders are getting paid more, right? They need to be focusing on the stuff that matters. They're leading themselves. They're stepping up. They're speaking up to influence, to inspire action. But I would say as well, and I'm a big proponent of this, I think one of our superpowers in life is humour and laughter. I think, it diffuses tension, it builds relationships, it lets us take ourselves a little less seriously, which we need to do at times. And it's not laughter for the sake of, a joke, but it's just everything just feels lighter. The team can feel we are working hard, but we're getting stuff done, and we've got everybody focusing on the right stuff. So
I guess they all need to feel like they're achieving something.
Absolutely. Everyone needs to know where they fit in, right? Everyone needs to know how their role and what they do impacts the bigger picture of the company. And I've seen jobs, I've been in companies where somebody's working really hard, but they can't see beyond what their job is, right? They don't know how what they do impacts, downstream and the end output to the client. So someone might go, I've made a mistake here, but it's okay because I fixed it. But they don't realise that little mistake has got a big downstream impact, and something ends up in an incorrect deliverable, incorrect data that could have, revenue implications. And it's not their fault, right? So everyone needs to know where they fit in the end-to-end process, because that also gives them pride then. And they know, if I wasn't here doing this, then we wouldn't be able to deliver that to the client. And that includes the leader. So everybody needs to be doing the stuff that is their strength, the stuff that they can really deliver on, and they know how they fit in that big puzzle.
So in that kind of situation where someone's made a mistake, I'm thinking the sign of a good leader would be that they're approachable. That person thinks, okay, I've made a mistake. It might have an impact. Let me just raise this with my manager or the person in my team that you can trust, because they're not going to throw you under the bus. They're going to do the best to resolve the situation as best they can.
Absolutely, and I think one of the things that a leader does is provide air cover. Right? People yes. will make mistakes. We doesn't matter what environment we live in, what environment we work in. It doesn't matter how automated things are. People can still make mistakes, and they say that the definition of integrity is doing the right thing when no one is looking. So, if you have done something wrong, it's important you can put your hand up and you can own it and you can talk about it, and it is received in the right way. There's a principle that, this is 20 years back now, Chris, but a principle that someone introduced to me, and I love it. The idea of being soft on people but tough on performance. You've got your job, you know what you need to do, you've got to do it. There's KPIs, there's expectations of what you need to do, but let's give people all the support, all the encouragement, all the coaching and training within reason for them to get that job done and for them to do it properly. Tough on performance and soft on people, and I still lean on that at times now myself.
I like that saying. I like the sound of that. That is inspiring, I think. So does that mean the leader has to be very honest? So when you're saying they, providing the air cover, if a team is very tired but still performing, what do you need to change there?
So that's a red flag, absolutely, because for the right reasons, they're focusing on the wrong stuff, okay. Right? Or they're not focusing on the stuff that matters and means that they can kind of increase that energy level. So I would almost have a bit of a tactical approach to it first, where I'd say, right, it doesn't matter how experienced you are, it almost doesn't matter how senior you are. The job's getting done, but we're exhausted, and we shouldn't be exhausted. So let's make sure we're focusing on the right stuff. So there'd almost be like a tactical, maybe stand-up meeting daily, stand-up meeting weekly, just to say, right, let's have a look. What is it that we're doing? Are we focusing on the stuff that's going to move us forward? Are we focusing on the stuff that we feel comfortable with, right? It's not going to move us forward, but we can tick a box and say, I did this thing that I feel comfortable with and I've contributed. It's all around how we manage our time and how we make our decisions. And have you heard of the Eisenhower matrix?
I have, but explain it to me.
So the Eisenhower matrix, created by President Eisenhower, all around time management and decision making. And it's how we look at things that are important versus things that are urgent on a matrix of low to high. And then that helps us understand what we put in each quadrant and therefore where we should spend our time. Now, when you're in some businesses or some jobs where things change daily, right? You start the day thinking, this is my list that I'm going to do. Then by 10 o'clock in the morning, that's shifted. And then by midday, it's shifted again. We know that that happens, right?
Yeah.
It's difficult to pause and go, right, let me put my tasks into each quadrant. I recognize that. But it helps just with a way of thinking. And I do it myself as well. I mean, I woke up this morning and I've got a list as long as my arm. And I'm thinking, because I had potential internet challenges, I'm like, well, I've got all of this stuff going, but the most urgent that needs to be done now is, can I make sure that my internet is ready for my conversation with Chris at 1:30? It doesn't matter if I've got everything else going on. It's where am I going to spend my time right now that needs that immediate kind of action. And I think you start naturally thinking about urgent versus important, high versus low. So I would always urge somebody, you don't necessarily need to sit there and put every single task in a quadrant. That doesn't make sense. But start thinking about urgent versus important. And I would do something like that with a team that is performing but exhausted. They're not using their energy in the right way. We're not maximizing the efforts that they're putting in every day.
A psychologist once told me that that basically you need that dopamine hit. So you need to as an individual, but I guess this would go for a team, is you need to be mentally seeing yourself as making progress. So if you spend a week working on a project with your team and you haven't ticked anything off because it's just too big or there's nothing smaller in there, then you don't feel good. You don't have that. Your brain needs that satisfaction, that dopamine hit.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I guess a good leader would make sure that happens.
Well, it does, and I think that even in a big project where there's one big output, that there are things throughout that are mini wins, right?
Yes.
There are things throughout that you need to pause and you need to celebrate, and you need to say, right, the big end result is that we're going to launch this project on, X date, but we have 10 milestones in between that are breakthroughs, and that we are going to pause and we are going to put our hands up, we're going to celebrate in whichever way is appropriate for, the team or the business or the culture. But we are going to pause and we're going to give each other a pat on the back. And it's not doing it just for the sake of doing it. It is important because nowadays you do have projects that run for 3, 6, 12 months. And that's a long time to go without recognizing people's contribution, right? It really is. For the leader as well of a team. So I think having those daily meetings or those weekly meetings where you can understand the breakthroughs, you can understand, are people spending their time and energy in the right way? Is there anything that a leader needs to step in and help course correct or give air cover to? That can uncover and surface fatigue and frustration really quickly, but also gives you an opportunity to go, look at this, we're blinking doing it. This is great.
I definitely think, because I feel the overwhelm almost if something is so far from being delivered. And you've got to just keep eking away at it, but that hangs over my head. If I think something's so far away, and oh my God, look at all this work we've got to do, even if you've got time, it's horrible. So I think a good leader for me would be someone who helps to iterate those steps.
Absolutely, and I think that it goes beyond internal to the team as well. When you have these big long timelines of delivery projects, whatever it might be, you should be hand in hand with your client or your customer in that as well. And the client and the customer needs to recognise the milestones too. Now, they're not going to recognise them unless they're part of building it, which they should always be. In a perfect world, they should be. And if you don't say, right, I want to bring, hey, Mr. Client, can you come in? I'd really like you just to get on a phone call with the team or pop in the office for 10 minutes and just convey your appreciation for how the team is doing, how they are moving, how they are focused on your deliverable, and it can be the good and the bad, right? Hey team, I'm really pleased, this is great. It would be wonderful if we could move this a little bit faster, or there might be pushes and pulls, but having a client or a customer step in and talk to teams regularly, for me, that used to be absolutely motivating. When I was doing that type of work, and now it is as well, but when I was doing that type of work, hugely motivating to hear directly from the client and the customer, especially when you're sitting in a corner office and we're just getting on with the work and you feel a little bit, unseen at times.
So on that note, when a team is tired but performing and they need that sort of rejuvenation, what are the fastest interventions that don't require a massive transformation program? I guess that goes to if a team's a bit dysfunctional as well.
I think there's a couple. So first of all, I think we need to remind ourselves that we can give ourselves permission. And there's a lot of focus at the moment on this phrase of self-leadership and personal leadership. So it's the fact that, yes, you're part of a team. Yes, you have a job to do. Yes, the pressures can come down on you. But as irrespective of what job we do, it is our job to lead ourselves, to give ourselves permission, to take those breaks, to understand and ask for help when we need to understand what is asked of us and make sure that we are comfortable that we can deliver on it. So whilst it's not an intervention, I think the conversation around self-leadership, personal leadership, is hugely important to have at any time. As a reminder, right? Give yourself permission. I was working with a client just before Christmas, actually, and one of the challenges that they have is a lot of the team are working till 8, 9, 10 o'clock at night. Because they're like, oh, I've got this list to do. I've got to tick everything off my list. The reality of the role that they're in is that they will never get to the bottom of that list because there's always something more being added on, right? And so I think it's really, again, thinking about, that Eisenhower matrix, what's urgent versus what's important, what can wait, what's going to push us forward, but also giving ourselves permission to pause, to say, I don't need to work beyond 5 o'clock, 6 o'clock, and I recognise that different teams, different cultures, different shift work. So I use that time, just as an idea. But I think it's that constant reminder about self-leadership, personal leadership, giving ourselves permission. There is somebody who is managing a team, but that person is managing the work. They're not managing how you manage yourself. So that's a good reminder. And then I think having those check-ins on breakthroughs, barriers, celebrating execution, celebrating milestones that have been achieved are hugely important as well. And I would also say, Chris, I could talk about this for hours. You must interject if I'm talking too much.
No, I'm fascinated. I'm fascinated.
But I do again think, having the customer, the client, the CEO, the MD coming and speaking to people and just reminding them of the importance of what they're doing, but also that we're not expecting people to work 24 hours a day. Sometimes you just need to hear that from somebody to go, right, you know what, I'm just going to turn off for now. Nothing is going to fall apart if I turn off now and come back into work tomorrow morning and go and spend time with my family, my friends, my loved ones.
That is very important to have that work-life balance, I think. But it makes me think, I'm just thinking back on some of the jobs I've worked in, and I know what's grated on me in the past is where I'm sitting there, I'm working on a big pitch or a big proposal, and I know I'm going to be working late, and then there goes the boss, basically the leader of the team, walking out right on 5 p.m, 6 p.m, whatever finish time is, and it's really it's grating in the fact is you don't blame them because you're sensible enough and mature enough not to say, but it is well, why are you leaving before me every night? So as a leader, do you need to set the example? How much do you need to set the example in those situations where, I guess on one hand they set an example of look, I've got a family, I'm leaving, but also your employees, your team is sitting there badgering and beavering away for a few more hours. Where do you draw the line?
I think it's important that a leader can roll their sleeves up and get their hands dirty. Yeah. And I think there's a piece of, just awareness of what it's like to say, bye folks, I'm off for dinner with my wife, my husband, my friends, whatever it might be. Remember the job's got to be done and I'm expecting it on, my desk at 9 a.m. I think that is terrible leadership. Yeah. I think that there are times when people do have to pull really late shifts, but I think it's the leader needs to have we use the word leader, sometimes it's manager, they're not necessarily interchangeable, but it can be a manager as well in this instance. They need to have thought about the work that's being done. They need to be able to understand where are the pressure points and do they need to move people around? Because there's real power in a leader saying, you know what, you're doing that right now and that's your job, but hey, I need you to move over here because you've got the skill set to help this person, so this person doesn't need to pull an all-nighter till 9 a.m. I think, and I've been in situations, Chris, where I've seen leaders do that, and you go, okay, and then at some point I've gone, no, you know what, I'm going to have a conversation now. I'm going to go and talk to this person and say, this is this is not okay. It's important. I've gone and talked to leaders before now and said, look, it's not that you're leaving, but I can see everybody around me leaving and I'm the only person in the office and I don't think that that's right. So but you need to be able to have that conversation. You need to have a leader that's open to that conversation. Absolutely. And then there's some cultures. I used to work in Japan for a long time, and that was really interesting. And we're talking quite a while ago now, not to age myself, but on a Friday night, I couldn't leave until my manager had left, and my manager couldn't leave until their manager had left. So you might have people in a Friday evening in the office until 11 o'clock at night. It's cultural, right? And there's other cultures where it's very different. I was in Argentina for a while, and 4 o'clock on a Friday, it didn't matter what was happening, everybody went drinking with their clients and customers, right? It's very different. But I think it's important that you can have that conversation with a leader, and a leader needs to be sensitive and aware. They will ask people to work miracles because we have to. It's the world we live in. But they need to be exceptions and not the rule.
Yeah, there are certainly times where I wish my manager had stepped in, or the leaders had stepped in and say, so Chris is going to be here for a while, and he's going to need some help. And it's hard because as the employee, as that team member, you don't really want to ask your colleagues, can you help me? Can you stay back? Because, they're working hard as well. They've got families. So I think it is quite important, I think, to know what your team's up to and to be able to manage the resources appropriately.
It's huge. And I think it comes back to that idea of the leader brings the weather, right? It's not just that they bring the atmosphere, that they bring kind of how people are feeling. That leader creates that environment of what people deem as acceptable and not acceptable. And we need to be able to challenge in a positive way, where we don't feel that there's going to be any risk or penalty from doing so. But it takes a leader who has great self-awareness and who can also explain the rationale for the reasons that they make, right, or the decisions they make.
It sounds like a lot like it comes down to culture, organizational culture and team culture, and the leader sets that culture, or has a big influence on that culture at least. You've done a lot with companies and firms that have merged and teams that have merged, where I guess you're getting two cultures that are potentially clashing or potentially complement each other. But what breaks typically when teams tend to grow quickly or merge?
I think the starting point is communication. And it's not because people don't want to communicate. It's not because they don't know how to communicate. It's because you've taken two teams as an example of... Let me use an example of a company that I've worked with recently. They had a sales and a marketing team, and both of these teams were very, very high performing. And they both came together under the same leader. And the leader was quite new to the organisation as well. And so you've got two high performing teams in their own right. You've got a leader who is a strong talent. You've got three different entities all coming together. And everyone, it's going to be great. It's going to work. It's going to work. And it has. To be clear, it has.
Really?
The two teams, the potential they had it's blown up. It's huge. But in the beginning it wasn't, because people didn't know how to talk to each other. They didn't know how to communicate. And so I think communication and understanding how people work is kind of the trigger, but then that triggers other issues around kind of onboarding and handoffs and expectations, and that creates frustrations with ownership and roles and responsibility, and then fundamentally, like, the values and the identity of the team can then start wobbling if they haven't been, strongly kind of put in place and the foundations revisited. So I think it doesn't matter whether it's a restructure internally, whether it's an M&A, whether, you've got, unfortunately, org restructures that happen. I think we always have to take time to level set and say, have we got the strength in place? Are the foundations in place for how these teams work together? Irrespective of whether they are high performing or not, it's now a new world. There's new ways of working, there's new expectations, and when you don't voice it, when you don't talk about it, then the norms become the stuff that's not said, and that can create cracks and fissures everywhere.
Yeah, I guess job security is probably a big thing that I would think about when mergers happen. When two companies come together, you've got two sales teams. Well, you either, just have a twice the size sales team as you did originally, or there has to be some trimming there.
Well, in situations where I've actually been in a company and there was an acquisition and I was asked to help at the time I was managing the operations team, and so this team, this company that was being acquired, was really going to impact the space that I was managing, and I was asked to help with bringing the team in, figuring out who needed to stay, who needed to go, what the structure looked like, what the KPIs were, etc. And it was eye-opening for me, because I was there going, right, I know my job is safe because I'm looking after both of these this new company we've inherited or we bought, and the team I currently have. But what does that mean for everybody? There can only be one, ops manager. There can only be one programming manager, And so a big part of that was communication to the organisation. And it's nerve-wracking for people. And sometimes the business doesn't have the answers, right? Before a team actually, is absorbed into a company, you can sit and you can look at the numbers and the KPIs and make assumptions on assumptions on assumptions of, what you're going to need. And you have to do that because there needs to be a starting point. But then it's not until kind of, a team kind of comes and joins that you kind of go, oh, okay, then now I've also got to look at the talent as well that we have and the skill set, and what client portfolio are they bringing over with them, and where is their overlap and where are their synergies. And so to the teams themselves, it was always a case, in the instance that I can think of now that I was very much involved in that as an employee, talking and saying, listen, there will be changes. We can't tell you what they're going to be yet. We're not hiding anything from you, but there will be changes. For now, I just implore you all to please try not to worry about it, to get on with your job and to prove what you can do. And it's difficult. It's a difficult message to give. But I think sometimes as leaders, we don't have all the answers. But what's most important is that we are transparent in what we do know and what we don't know. The worst thing is when people are sitting there going, oh, I know that my name is on a list, but no one's told me this yet. I mean, that's awful. It's such an awful place to be in. So, the stuff that we don't know as leaders, we've still got to be really transparent with that. And it's when people are hearing about themselves from people that they shouldn't be hearing about, that's the problem, right?
Yeah.
And if you don't talk to people, they create their own reality, right? They create their own reason for what might be happening.
Unfortunately, you probably get some bad eggs who would just, start to stir the pot with fake news, for want of a better expression, because they just make stuff up just to protect themselves, perhaps. And it's not true. So
absolutely not. And you'd hope not, but people react in ways when they don't know what's happening and when they're faced with uncertainty, and it does happen. And I've been in situations, and they're awful situations, where I've had to make lots of people redundant, and it's one of the ugly necessities of being a business leader. It's horrible. But one of the things I learned very early on, was you have to be open and honest with people. Even the stuff that you haven't decided yet, you need to let them know you haven't decided, so that they feel that they're getting everything from you. Otherwise they start creating their own truth. And it's redundancies, layoffs at the best of times are awful. And if you do it with all of that uncertainty around it, it's at the core of everything is the individual. We need to do everything with respect for individuals.
So what's the end game? You've merged two companies. You're trying to shape the team within the sales team. You're trying to shape that team. What does that strong team identity look like? What does that function look like?
So the output that you want is teams knowing the language that they want to use to refer to themselves as. And it's not what we do, but it's saying things like, this is how we approach problems, this is how we talk to clients, this is how we delegate, this is how we manage our productivity. It's that shared agreement of what's good versus exceptional. What are our expectations on how we're going to manage our productivity, manage our ownership, manage our response? How are we going to challenge ourselves internally before we outwardly go to the client? There's so much I could say on this. I love this kind of topic. And it's clear lines on knowing what you will and what you won't do as well. And I think when there is whether it's a restructure or there's just uncertainty in the team and people just need that external voice to come in and challenge on kind of the roles and responsibilities or the process or whatever it might be, That strong team identity, I think, comes from obsessing over how we think, how we decide, how we hold each other accountable, and then creating the foundations for that. And also being able to say, if we asked one client to describe us to another client, what would they say? And if they wouldn't know what to say, and if the language they used didn't resonate with what we held ourselves to as our own internal identity, then we haven't been doing it correctly.
So that kind of covers off what good looks like. Have you got examples of where you've seen it not go so well and where mistakes have been made?
When two teams have come together.
Yeah.
Well, I've been in that situation as well, where teams have come together and.
Okay. So what went wrong? Tell us where the mistakes were made, and what would you do next time?
There wasn't enough planning. There wasn't enough planning. There wasn't enough understanding what the touch points were. There wasn't enough discussion around what people's values were. There's always the company values, right? There's always the overarching umbrella company values, but every team has their own identity and the values that they also subscribe to that filter up to that. And so without planning, without discussion about, the values, the foundations, the identity, are there clear roles and responsibilities? Do you have a clear, it's very tactical, but have you heard of the phrase RACI? R-A-C-I. R-A-C-I. Oh,
yeah. Yeah, I don't know what it means.
Yeah, so it's almost like when you've got two teams coming together, you almost need to do what they call a RACI. Look at who's responsible for what, who's accountable for what, who needs to be consulted on what, and who needs to be informed of what. And that is almost going down to that level of detail when teams come together to capture those things that are going to fall through the cracks. Because it's very easy when the planning's not been done properly to be able to say, it's his fault. And one of the things that we absolutely cannot do, and I love this phrase, I learnt it when I was working at Nielsen, was point a finger, lose a finger. So, there's no blame culture. There cannot be a blame culture. Yes, things will go wrong. And when things do go wrong, you have to sit down and you have to have the right people around the table to understand what happened and what we're going to do differently. But there cannot be that blame culture of, well, it's not me, it's them. Because, we never sat down to discuss what the end-to-end process looked like, or who was responsible for this, or who was accountable for that. So
yeah, I was going to say, so there can't be a blame culture, but there has to be accountability.
Oh, there has to be. There's a cross on somebody's forehead for everything, I like to say, right? And it's not a cross that you're shooting an arrow at. It's just, there's a cross on my forehead, I'm accountable for this. And so you have to have those open discussions. You have to look at root causes of when things go wrong, or how did something go wrong. But then everyone needs to come together to say, right, well, how do we make sure it doesn't happen again? But that whole idea of a blame culture just instills ugliness.
Yeah.
Right? It's just, and that then is just an environment that people don't want to work in. And also that if somebody makes a mistake, they won't put their hand up and say it because they know it's going to get ugly. Instead of that, right, you made a mistake. What happened? What are you going to do differently so it doesn't happen again? How are we going to capture this so that we can make sure it doesn't go to the client? Those are the conversations to have versus, oh my God, I've made a mistake and I can't have everybody calling me out on a town hall of 500 people, and so I just won't tell anyone I've done it. And that's what happens if you don't have that open, transparent conversation and approach rather to when things go wrong.
Yeah, it's definitely something that has to be handled very, very carefully, I think. Now, I've seen you write and talk about psychological safety and that leaders are responsible for psychological safety. What does that mean?
So I think what people initially, if they haven't really understood it, and I myself did this as well, when I first heard the phrase psychological safety, I thought it was all being nice, avoiding tension, making everyone feel comfortable. But actually, it's about creating an environment and a belief where you can speak up, you can have different ideas, you can challenge people, you can admit mistakes, you can take risks without being humiliated, without being punished, without there being any type of, fallback or what's not the word, fallback's the one, come back on you, right? And it's how do you create that environment where people feel comfortable to do that? So like a lot psychological safety, it's about that. It's about being able to challenge and admit in an environment where people are going to welcome it and constructively help you versus see it as a weakness and challenge you back in a very confrontational way.
So I think you've said there's a lot of myths around it. What's the biggest myth around psychological safety that leaders get wrong?
It's about being nice and about making people feel comfortable.
Okay.
Yeah, and I think that is one of the big myths. You know, when you ask people, do you feel like psychologically safe you wouldn't really ask anybody that, right? But do you feel safe in the environment to be able to speak up and talk?
Yeah.
And
Empowered.
exactly. And some people might say, oh, you know what, my manager's really nice. They're always lovely and supportive. That's great, but that's not necessarily psychological safety. You need to know that you can speak up, you can challenge, you can take risks, and it's all done in an environment where you're supported and where you're helped to do that and where it's welcomed. There's nothing worse than an environment where everyone just goes, oh yes, oh yes, oh yes, and doesn't really challenge, even if they have ideas, even if they think things aren't going to work. You don't want yes people around you, because that's not going to take the individual, the team, or the business, or the client any further, right? We want to be pushing ourselves constantly and raising the bar.
But knowing, I guess, that your team leader, your leader has your back and your team has your back.
Absolutely.
Like being on the football field or something in the end, isn't it?
You're absolutely right. And I think the first time, so one of the phrases I love is positive tension. And the first time I heard this phrase, positive tension, it was about 15 years ago. And no joke, Chris, it changed my life, right? I had just moved into a leadership team. The manager at the time, the leader at the time, who I have and still have tremendous respect for, kind of called me the baby of the team, right? I was younger than everyone by about 10 years. If they were listening to this, they may say 5 years, but I'm convinced it was about 10 years.
Yeah,
younger than everyone that by about 10 years. I was the least experienced at the time in the area that I was working in. And he talked about positive tension, and I was like, what is this positive tension? And then I quickly realised that in the room, this leadership team, they fought, they challenged, always respectfully. It's never personal, but they fought, they challenged each other, they raised the bar, they would joke with each other, they'd have different perspectives, they'd have different priorities, but it was always done in a respectful way. So when I think about positive tension, it's that space between different perspectives and different ideas and different opinions. But it should always generate a really respectful discomfort, and sometimes like an intellectual friction as well. And I just love that phrase. And so I try in everything I do to create an environment of positive tension. If I ask a question, everyone goes, yeah, that makes sense, or yeah, that's okay. I'm always like, no, let's dig deeper, because there's no way that you all agree with me. There's no way that you all think she's got it 100%. Ask me questions, challenge me. I welcome it, because it raises the bar for all of us.
Yeah, and that's why you've got a dynamic team, right, of different personalities, different ideas, so that you can challenge each other.
We have to. And so this whole idea of diversity as well, of background, of education, of experience, of culture, of thinking. There's so many different ways. I love that. And one of the most diverse, dynamic leadership teams I had, there was about 12 people, and we had somebody from the US, somebody from the UK, someone from North Korea, from South Africa, China, I think it was Abu Dhabi actually, someone from Abu Dhabi as well. We had 2 French people in it. It was so diverse that when we had a conversation, there was no way on earth that I was going to say, right, guys, this is what I think we should do. And everyone was going to go, yes, Kate. It was a dynamic, exciting, sometimes high voice driven conversation, but it was all done in the right way to raise the bar. People all had different experiences, different perspectives. And one of the most powerful things that I ever did in a role that I did have was bring somebody who'd been a captain in the Russian army for 20 years. And he'd come out of the Russian army and he wanted to go into business, and someone introduced him to me. And I was managing an operations team at the time, and I had him start managing part of my Western European team, who were a wonderful team, but they played quite safe, right? Everything was the same. Everybody knew each other. They'd known each other for about 15 years. A lot of the culture, a lot of the ways of working was the same, and we needed to shake things up. They weren't doing anything badly, but I wanted to shake things up. So I had somebody who'd been a Russian captain, or rather a captain in the Russian army for 2 decades, come and start managing them. And initially it was like, what do we do? He doesn't know what we do. He doesn't know how we do this. He comes from a different background. Within like 9 months, I think it was even less than that, everything had changed. The way everyone was thinking, the way people were taking chances, the way they were taking, controlled risks, the outputs, the performance, everything just raised the bar. It was phenomenal. And that's because you've got different people with diverse backgrounds and thoughts positively challenging everyone in a psychologically safe environment.
So you linked positive tension with shared conflict. Is that shared conflict what you've just been talking about?
No, I think that, so positive tension, and they're very linked. Shared conflict is when you're on the same side of the challenge. You're on the same side of the issue.
Okay.
But you might have a different idea about what how you're going to solve for it, right? It's not you versus me. It's not my team versus your team. It's an issue that we need to solve together. We're on the same side of it, but we might have a different approach to it, and we might need to come to some kind of common ground as to how we think it's right. But it's not them versus us. It's very much us versus an issue or a challenge that needs to be solved.
Okay. So why does avoiding conflict often lower standards and increase mistakes?
If you don't challenge challenge again in a positive way, if you don't challenge what you think needs to be different or doesn't look right, or you need to raise the bar in, then the unspoken becomes the standard. And if you don't speak about it and it becomes the standard, then that's when you can see mistakes happen. That's when you can see, how can I explain it? That's when you see the outputs, the decisions no one talked about, they become the norm. And actually, we need to challenge each other. We need to check, hey, are we doing this correctly? Is this the right thing for the client, the customer, for the business, for the team, for the individual? And sometimes it takes time to see that happen, right? Sometimes you go, oh, we're all happy with this. But then you see things starting to kind of bleed through, and why has no one talked about this? Why have we not addressed this quality issue here? Well, we all kind of just thought it was somebody else's to deal with, or we didn't want to rock the boat. And then all of a sudden you've got a quality issue.
So if that healthy conflict dynamic, and I guess a positive tension, they both don't really exist, or they need to be more existent, what kind of simple structure or script would you advise us to use to try and bring that up, aside from, bringing in a Russian military leader?
Yeah, I know. We don't always have the option, right, to bring someone who's been in the Russian army for 2 decades. So I'd start with always use I. So frame your input using I, because when you use I, you're owning it. If you say you're wrong, or you've got this wrong, or you're thinking about this the wrong way, that's very defensive. That's very, challenging in itself. So I would always frame the input with ownership and use I language, right? I see it a bit differently versus you're wrong. I'd always talk about a shared goal, because you should always be doing this when it's for the good of, the business. If we're talking about, in business, there should be a shared goal. So anchor the tension or the disagreement in a shared goal, something that you both care about, right? We really want this project to succeed because we really want to retain this client, right? That's a shared goal. That someone is passionate enough about it to talk about it with somebody who's also passionate enough about it. I would share my view. From my perspective, this is how I see us doing differently, right? Or this is the risk that I see could happen. And invite a challenge, right? What am I missing? Is there something that I'm not thinking about here? Is there something that you've experienced that I've not been able to kind of see or do? Because that turns the disagreement then into a conversation. It turns the disagreement into somebody contributing something. And then you've got to decide and commit. Right? And that's tricky, because sometimes you just can't figure out what the right thing is. But if you both bring two different perspectives, again anchored in that same belief, you will find a common ground. You will. And we don't want everyone to go, oh, we can't figure this out, I'm going to go and talk to the manager about this. There's always a way of figuring out something that is right when we try to see somebody else's opinion. And I think sometimes we have our own blind spots, right, where we're convinced that what we think is the right thing. And so I think just generally, and it's not just in business, I think generally in the world, we all need to recognise what our blind spots are and be open to the fact that, we might need to think differently about it. And then I would always close the loop, right, because when you close the loop, having been able to find a way to move forward, it protects and promotes the trust between both of you, right? Thanks for this. You've shown me a way that I hadn't thought about it. Or even though we're not doing it your way this time, I think it's a really good idea, and we need to bear that in mind next time we have, a similar conversation. So I haven't really given you that succinctly, Chris, but those are steps that I would think about when I have those types of conversations with people. And we have to.
A really careful use of the I and the we, because in one sentence you're saying I think we should do it. I think we should do it this way.
Yeah.
And I think this will bring us success. So you sort of give you a perspective, but joining everybody together at the same time, which is quite carefully curated, I guess, in the way you say it.
It is, and I think the first time somebody goes, "Oh, I've got to have this conversation. It's going to be really ugly." You practice it, right? You do practice what those kind of phrases are to go in and to not lose your cool and to be collaborative about it. And then I think the more you become comfortable with speaking up and using your voice, because we all need to do that. We need to speak up and use our voice, because otherwise decisions are made in corridors where you're not there, right? You need to be able to influence. You don't want to have those conversations with people and then afterwards, as I've done multiple times, go, "Oh, I wish I'd just said that." So it becomes very tactical to start with, and then the more you use your voice, you speak up for the right reasons, the more you naturally start using I, you, and we in the right way.
Very good. Yeah, very good. Now, a lot of our listeners or viewers are in professional services. So we have that model where we basically sell our time or our experience for money. That's like lawyers and doctors and accountants and coaches and people like you and I. So it's kind of a unique environment, I think, versus a lot of others. What do you think a strong team identity looks like in a professional services organisation?
So that's a really good question. I think it comes back to having the right people doing the right work at the right level. It comes back to knowing the how we do things, right? And fundamentally, you've got to know what we do, right? I mean, that's within the team. But I think it comes back to the how we think, how we decide, how we hold each other accountable. And where we can have those internal positive tensions, those internal shared conflicts, internally, but externally to the client, it's seamless, right? So the client should be able to go and talk to anybody within reason. I know that professional services, you will have certain specializations, but the client should be able to talk to anyone within the business, and it's not apparent to them that internally there's been a lot of discussion around who is going to do what, how we're going to do it. I think there's a piece around impact, not effort. I think that's huge, because when we start managing people's outcomes by hours, we're talking about the wrong thing. We need to be talking about accountability through their outcomes rather than not their hours spent. And I think that's a big shift when I think about professional services and team identity. I think people must be able to challenge each other positively for the good of the individual, the team, the client. I think positive tension and shared conflict need to be inherently part of a team, but treated in the right way. And for teams that don't necessarily do that, or certain cultures, that's a shift to think about. That is a shift to think about. But I think we also need to be able to have positive tension and shared conflict with the client, right? The idea of kind of consultancy is not saying yes to everything. It's knowing when we need to say no. Yes. And I think that's a big part of team identity as well.
Yeah, I'm just thinking about my experience. I've got a lot of experience working in law firms, and they're funny little beasts, or big beasts in some cases, because at the crux of it, same for accountancy firms as well, maybe even in medical. You've got professionals, you've got specialists, you've got lawyers, you've got doctors, you've got accountants who are highly trained, highly specialised, and they are, effectively the fee earners of the business. They do bring the money in. They are the product, I guess. And then you've got the rest of the business support, the team that runs the company. Like any company has, it might be selling a product. But you still got people who do the manufacturing and people who run the company and keep things moving. And it's a funny dynamic, because you really have got often the fee earners, the ones bringing the money, who really look down on those who are sort of helping to run the business. And those who are helping to run the business the fee earners can't work without those people who are running the business. There would be no business. There would be no one to help them to give their legal advice, to give their financial advice, no one to help them to deal with the clients. So, what I found is you do need to have quite a good supportive team around you, because camaraderie is quite important. You need to be able to stick up for yourself and your teammates, and to when people don't respect you as a function or respect you as a team.
Yeah.
So that dynamic is quite important, I think.
I think that's a great point, Chris. And I think in situations where we've had that, wherever you've got people doing the selling, there's always a different dynamic with the people that are getting the job done in-house, right? Like, you can sell whatever you want to sell, but unless someone is going to make it, unless someone is going to get it to your client on time, you're not going to win, right? It's not a good situation to be in. And so one of the businesses that I worked in was always, don't commit on behalf of the doers. So you can sell something, and if you're selling it within, the KPIs or whatever the product range, the service range you have, then fine. If you're going to sell, and I recognise I'm going off script a little bit here, but if you're going off script with what you're going to sell, don't sell it and then turn around and go, make it happen.
Yeah.
Because those people that you say make it happen to have every right to go, no. Right?
Yes.
Because you've just committed to something on our behalf. And so it was a really interesting conversation when we started introducing that idea of, yes, there's a catalogue of services or products and you can sell those, and great, go and sell them, because if you don't sell them, none of us have jobs. So we respect that. I mean, that piece of selling and that piece of service delivery, I mean, it's huge, right? It's huge to be respected. It's a different skill set, absolutely. But when you are asking people to do something different to help you with that sale, to help you make that sale a reality, you have to recognise the talent, the skill set of those people, and you've got to have them on side. And I would always say, and it always feels a little like school, but I would always say a day in the life. Wherever you can, have someone go and spend 2 hours, half a day with people who are doing the job to allow you to go and sell, because you will have a better appreciation of them as an individual and the job that they do.
That's well said. I think and very, very accurate. And thinking in terms of resources, so there's, I guess, in professional services, but even beyond that, there's been this concept of fractional people coming in. So I'm a fractional CMO. We've got fractional CFOs, you've got agencies, consultants, which have been around for a long time. That's obviously brings an interesting dynamic as well, potentially, because you are bringing in people externally who, have a lot of experience usually, or they're not coming in as a temporary resource to just fill a ground level gap. It's usually to help like you and I with some sort of strategy or structure or something that it doesn't exist in the organisation. So how should leaders treat fractionals, I guess, and make best use of them as part of the team without losing accountability?
So I think when you bring somebody in, you treat them like an insider, but you hold them accountable by design. And that can be things such as, they need to know the vision, the strategy. They need to be part of those discussions, but there needs to be real clarity between what are they accountable for, what do they deliver on, what can they add, give advice on rather. They need to be onboarded like leaders. But I always think, and this was when I was managing a very big data acquisition team at one point, and we had vendors and suppliers in their thousands, individuals and small companies. It was crazy. It was the only way we could deliver. But I remember someone saying to me once, I'd said, it was the vendor stuff that up right. And this was when I was, a lot younger, and someone said, you have chosen the vendor that you're going to work with. Therefore, they are an extension of your team. Therefore, if a vendor has messed up, you have messed up. You don't get to go, oh, it was the vendor. Or it was the supplier, or it was the CMO or the CFO that we used, got their numbers incorrect, or whatever it might be. We don't get to do that because we have chosen them. We have orchestrated this team around us to help us and work with us to deliver value. So they have to be one and the same. They need to know the vision, they need to know the strategy, they need to be sitting at the table, but they need to know what they are responsible for. And they need to be crystal clear KPIs. I think the people need to know exactly what they're responsible for delivering on, and what they're advising, deciding, providing. It's not easy, but without them, you can't deliver what you need to deliver. And I think we've moved beyond the world now of ping-ponging emails back into, I've got to speak to this supplier, or, this vendor, or, the accountant, or, the CFO. We don't do that anymore. I think they have to be sitting at the table. They are the team that you have built around you to deliver. And that whole idea of saying, it's not us, it's somebody that's not on the payroll that has made a mistake, is not okay. Because let's not kid ourselves, if somebody who's not on the payroll had done something magical for the client, how often does someone go, oh, it's not us, it was the vendor or supplier, right?
Yep.
We're happy to say,
I appointed them, wrong. It was me, it was
so
good.
Exactly. Pick me, I was the one that selected them. We don't do that, right? Well, I tell a lie, some people will, but more normally kind of human nature defaults to pointing when something's gone wrong versus when something's gone right. So it really is the team you've orchestrated around you, and therefore you've got to treat them as an insider, but hold them accountable by design of processes and communication.
I think also the other angle of that is you're on a highway to nowhere if you blame the external person, because they're not there permanently. You're there permanently. Your team are responsible ultimately. They come in, they bring their added advice and service, and the KPIs are there, and they deliver it, but then they're probably gone. And you can't blame them because you're left holding the baby.
Absolutely. And also, let's not kid ourselves, your CMO, your CFO is probably working with one or two of your competitors as well, right? We don't have that, they're mine, they can't go anywhere else. And so, you're not going to be nice just for the sake of that, but we need to recognise that they are part of the team, and you don't want to be left holding the baby because, it's just not a nice position to be in.
No, absolutely not. So I guess on that note as well, what does cutting investment in people, why does cutting investment in people often cost more within 6 to 12 months?
So I think on a spreadsheet, it might look like the right thing to do. It might look prudent. We're doing the right thing here. We've looked at all the KPIs. We've looked at, the ROI, the cost per unit, all of those good stats that we need to look at. But the reality is, I think it defers, it hides, and then I think it multiplies the problem. And what can happen, is you end up with, there's loads of things you can end up with. You can end up with rework, you can end up with lost clients, you can end up with burnout, you can end up with slow growth, no growth, you can end up, going backwards. So it is important that you have the right number of people, the right skill set in an organisation. But I do think, and I've seen this myself, we cut people because people are the quickest cost that we can take out.
Yeah,
right?
And probably the biggest cost.
Absolutely. They're the quickest, they're the biggest cost to take out. And so on paper, brilliant, let's do it. But we don't plan for what's going to happen in 6, 12, 18 months. And I've been in a situation where I've, okay, it was coming down from top, but again, I had a voice. I've walked people out the door for the right reason at that time, and you kind of look at your total organisation. You go, well, it's okay because we can pull a little bit of that person to support this, and we can put this with that little 5% of that person, and we'll find a way of making it work. And then 6, 9 months later, I'm recruiting again.
Yes.
Right. So all you've done is for 6 or 9 months, you've created some chaos, you've created some uncertainty. You've created burnout, no doubt, all of that good stuff. And yes, you've seen that, that immediate cost saving from, people out of the business. But then you end up having to have the new cost, and it is painful, of recruiting, getting the right skill set, onboarding them, training them, and getting them to a point where they can contribute. So yes, there are times when we have to, skinny the people, skinny the team, the size of the team, but we've got to do it in the right way.
Yeah.
And it has to be done in the right way.
It's I've actually been involved. I've seen an example where it's I think possibly hasn't been done very well, where a new director's come in and very quickly removed two of the most senior members of the team. And, I guess with the view to probably to cost cutting, get rid of the two most expensive people so I can bring in 4 or 5 much less expensive people. But not realising that you get rid of the two most senior people in the team, it's a brain drain for a start. You've absolutely lost, probably 15, 20 years combined experience.
Yep.
And experience in that organisation for people who are very well respected, and thrown the rest of the team into a spin because they have that uncertainty and they're actually not sure what their roles are and, how do I do this? If person A was taking care of this, who's going to do it now? So you have to be very careful about how you do it, and
Yep, you do. I mean, I could talk for hours on this topic as well. And what happens then is those two senior people go, all right then. They walk next door, go down the street, or walk outside, go down the street and walk into a competitor.
Yeah.
Walk into a competitor. And then you find yourself 6 months later going, oh, why did we do it? And I think what happens as well, and this is maybe a little cynical of me, but, you get new leaders that come in and do that. And immediately everyone goes, oh, look, they're making the tough decisions. They're doing what's right for the business. They're helping us with, our productivity or, whatever it might be. And then they move on to something else, 6 months, 9 months later, and it's other people that have to deal with the fallout of the decisions that were made.
Yeah.
And no one's going to get it perfect, but I'm always a little cynical as to are these decisions made for the right reasons.
Yeah, you've got to look at the stakeholders too. Ultimately, the stakeholders are going to be annoyed by it. Then you've probably done the wrong thing.
Yeah.
You have to be very carefully managed. But that's why I think you need actual experts like yourself who've done this before and can advise you of the right ways to do it. I mean, there's no right way, but the better methodologies to do it.
Yeah, and even if it's not necessarily advising, it's are you asking yourself the right questions, right? Are you thinking what's going to happen in 3, 6, 9 months, right? Are you asking yourself what happens if we remove this particular skill set or this person who's got 20 years of, a particular client or industry experience? We can talk about, and labour arbitrage is similar, right? You can walk somebody with 25 years out the door and you can replace somebody, in another country, with a year or 2 years experience. At the end of the day, who's going to be impacted? Probably the client. Probably the client who's going to go, hang on a second, the service level that I've got, so-and-so's very nice, but they are missing all the history of working with me. And it's not black and white. There are nuances, and sometimes these things have to be done. But I always question, are we asking ourselves the right question before we make those decisions? And I say that having been on the side of someone who's had to make redundancies and also someone who, in one job, was made redundant because I was a global role sitting in the UK. And, and that was an expense that the UK didn't want to manage. And so I've been on both sides of that. So it's an interesting dynamic. There is no right answer, but we need to really ask ourselves the tough questions to make sure we're doing the right thing. Yes, for the business, but for the clients and the people involved.
So, Kate, we've covered a wide range of topics today, and it's all been really, really interesting. I think our listeners and viewers would have gotten a lot out of it. But if we were to conclude, I guess, with some final thoughts from your side, some final tips, I guess, what would they be? What is probably the ultimate thing that comes out of what you said today, in your view, that organisations should bear in mind?
I think that we need to regularly do a sense check on how our team is doing. And our team in this instance includes leaders, managers, individual contributors. And that can be, an audit, a full-blown audit, or it can be asking yourself, every couple of months, maybe with your leadership team, your management team, maybe bringing in some of the folks on the ground, a couple of questions that just give us a sense check of, are we on the right track? Is there anything we need to do? Because when we don't have those questions, we think everything's okay, and sometimes you need to have quite specific questions. So I've actually, if it looks like I'm reading here, I've actually got a couple of questions here that I'd say on a scale of 1 to 5, for example, just to make it like quick and easy, on a scale of 1 to 5, 1 being I don't agree at all, 5 being I really agree, you could ask yourself questions like, Are we clear on what matters most right now? The big priorities, you know? Are we comfortable with people challenging ideas or decisions without it getting personal or there being any, playback on them rather? Are our standards clear? Like what we are actually being upheld to, our quality, our behaviour, our follow through with people? Do we deal with issues early, not after they've become problems? Do we have clear accountability? Is accountability explicit on who owns what? Do people believe that their voice really matters? Because everybody should feel that they can step up and speak up. Is our energy spent in the right way, creating value? And if someone new joined tomorrow, would they quickly understand what this team stands for? So those are 8 sentences, and there's various different ways you can look at this, but those are 8 sentences that I would urge everyone to take 5 minutes and do some really strong reflection on with any of the teams that they're managing or leading, or even the teams that they're part of. I think just regularly doing that sense check. We get so carried away with life, with firefighting, what's a priority right in front of us right now, what's burning, where the opportunities are, and that's all hugely important. But we need to pause every now and again and say, is our team ready for what's coming? And those are the type of questions that we can ask ourselves.
That's sage advice, Kate. Thank you very much for those 8 points and for everything you've helped us and advised us on today. If people do want to get in touch with you, what kind of work do you do, and how can they get in touch?
Oh, wonderful. So I do team audits, funnily enough, right? I do team audits. I also do facilitating and coaching over sessions with teams that are, feeling that pain, right? We're wasting money. We've not got our energy focused on the right way. So I love working with teams and in transforming, how they're spending their time and maximizing their efforts. And they can get in touch with me through LinkedIn, Kate Manton, or send an email at kate@baobabworks.co.uk.
Baobab Works, yeah. Now, you told me baobab is a tree in Africa?
It is. It's a big tree in Africa, and it's got a very wide base, and they live to be thousands of years old. They're incredible. And why I love the baobab tree is it lives through everything, right? The drought, the rainfall, the seasons, the cold. It's an incredible tree, extremely resilient, continues to grow through kind of all the discomfort that all the 4 seasons throw at it. And those are some of the values that, I live by, grow through discomfort and all of that the baobab tree represents. So I love it. I recognise it's difficult to say. I recognise that it might not roll off the tongue, but I'm a big fan of the baobab tree from my time living in Botswana.
Very good. And obviously it's the values that you instill in yourself and have, but that you try and instill in the people you work with as well. So that's wonderful. So thanks again, Kate, for joining us today. Kate Manton, much appreciated. Absolute
pleasure, Chris. Thank you for having me and for allowing me to talk as much as I have done.
No, it's brilliant. Brilliant. We're going to, I'm sure we're going to get a lot of questions out of this. So for our audience, that's it for this episode of Muhami Matters. A massive thanks to Kate Manton for joining us and for giving us practical ways to, make leadership feel lighter while still raising the bar on standards and clarity and accountability. If you enjoyed today's episode, be sure to subscribe, share it with your network. For more insights and support, visit muhami.ae or connect with me at CJA Consulting. I'm Chris Adams. Until next time, stay informed, stay empowered, and be a strong leader. Thank you for joining us on Muhami Matters. If you found today's episode valuable, subscribe and connect with me to stay updated. Join me again soon as we continue to bring you credible insights, practical strategies, and trusted advice to empower your professional journey. I'm Chris Adams. Until next time, stay informed and stay empowered.